Thank you, Nigel. And while he moves our slides accordingly, I will get started. I'm sure I'll catch up. Good morning again, and thank you for joining our annual school meal programs training. I'm Elizabeth Leach, and I'm thrilled to be here with you this morning. I want to start by sharing a thank you and expressing gratitude on behalf of our team and of ASI. Thank you for the dedication that you've shown to ensure that students in DC have access to high-quality, nutritious foods. Thank you for being flexible when we don't have all the information we want or need and information changes along the way. Thank you for being creative and problem solving as you just showed in our icebreaker today. And thank you for returning each day to do the work over again. DC students are better prepared to succeed each day and in life because of you. Here at ASI, we have adopted the use of CDC's whole school, whole community, whole child model, otherwise known as the WISC model. The WISC model is student-centered, and as you can see here by the student in the middle of the green star, it emphasizes the role of the community in supporting schools, the connections between health and academic achievement, and the importance of evidence-based school policies and practices. The WISC model has 10 components that are here in blue that working together support a student's health and wellness. Today, we'll be focusing on the nutrition, environment, and services component that's circled in red, but please know that we sit within a division of health and wellness and collaborate often with those developing policies regarding other components of the WISC model, such as physical education, COVID protocols, and allergy management. Here at ASI, we also base our work in the knowledge that healthy bodies and minds are the foundation of academic success. In your roles, you see this every day. The right nutrition supports a healthy body and mind, preparing students to be fueled and ready to learn. School meals are a critical component to students having that right nutrition. So while we dig into some nuances of the meal programs during our time today, please remember the reason we are doing so is to support students' healthy bodies and minds, which leads to academic success.
Thank you, Liz. I'm getting some feedback that we can't see the slides, we can only see Liz. So I'm just going to stop. Nigel, do you mind just doing a reshare and let's see if we can get the slides back up? I can see them, but I don't think everyone can. Oh, okay, now it says we can see the slides now. Great. Thank you all.
Thanks for jumping in, Alex. And for those who may not have seen the past couple slides, hopefully in Teams, it does allow you to navigate back and forth. So while I'm chatting, if you want to preview the previous couple slides, you should be able to navigate there yourself. All right. As leaders and champions of this work, we know that you see firsthand each day the impact school meals have on students. You can tell when a student can't learn or isn't ready to learn because they haven't had breakfast, for example. We also know that you've experimented over the past 2 years because you've had to about the best ways to feed students in various scenarios. In the icebreaker, we warmed up everyone's creativity a bit. And as we move forward in this school year from pandemic recovery into restoration, we want to hear some of the creativity you've already implemented or plan to implement to continue supporting student nutrition in the coming school year. We're going to drop a link in the chat now to a Menti board where we want to hear about your creative ideas for this coming school year or things that you have implemented. You can also use the QR code that you see on the screen here. Feel free to share examples of how you plan to make meals accessible in school, or alternatively, how you plan to make meals available in cases of pivoting to virtual learning or in unanticipated school closures. I know many folks have creative plans to promote and communicate the availability of school meals and additional community food resources. Feel free to share those. So before we continue on with our presentation, we'll take just a few minutes for those people to share. And before we hop off today, we're going to share out some themes and really creative ideas that you all shared with us at the start of our session. So why don't we give everyone, it's 10:07, let's give everyone about 2 minutes before we continue on.
All right, it looks like somebody took control of my presentation. Let me get it back up. If you see that take control of presentation button, please do not click that button. That takes access away from me. So let me get our slides back up.
All right. Thank you all for sharing. Feel free to continue doing so. And again, we will share out contributions towards the end of today's session. And now I'm happy to introduce Alex Dobbs, who will be discussing meals in the coming school year.
Thanks. Sorry, I was doing the Menti, so caught me off guard. Okay, I am just gonna wait for Nigel. Oh, perfect. Let me just make sure everybody can see the slides. I'm not getting any more notices that there are issues, so I'm just gonna go for it. I think people can see it. Okay, perfect. People can see it. Great. All right. So good morning to everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our annual training. And thank you to Nigel and Liz for getting us kicked off. So now we're going to talk about NSLP for this upcoming school year. As we go through this section, I want to remind you all that we are covering this school year and not summer operations. So there's been changes to summer. We sent out some emails and communications about it. But as we go through this next section, I just want to remind you we're really talking about the school year. So let's start by taking a step back to review meal access since the start of the pandemic. In March 2020, USDA released nationwide waivers allowing free meals to be served at open meal sites across the district. While these waivers changed over the past 2 years, we've had free open meal sites in place since March 2020. This allowed for children and students or parents in place of students to pick up meals, often multi-day meal packs, and bring them home to eat. This has provided the necessary flexibility through phases and transitions of the public health emergency. And we've seen meal service evolve along with the rest of the pandemic, where first meals were only being picked up by this grab and go style service. Then we transitioned to both grab and go and in person. And now we know most people are, or most kids are accessing their meals in person, while the option for grab and go still remains. So these nationwide waivers expired on June 30th, 2022, meaning that meal programs will return to traditional school breakfast program and national school lunch program operations. However, USDA has approved DC to use limited waivers starting July 1st, which we'll go into more detail on. And then again, just as a reminder, throughout the rest of the section, we're going to review basic NSLP along with some additional flexibilities for this school year. So not referring to summer operations because we know that there's even been changes to summer. So we're just talking about this school year. And then this section is going to be a little bit interactive. So whenever I ask a question, you can just drop your responses into the chat. All right. So our first question is, which of these statements are true? Is it A, NSLP can be served and reimbursed 7 days a week? Is it B, NSLP is open to everyone, including students from the neighborhood? Is it C, NSLP can only be served on school operating days to enrolled students? Or is it D, schools operating NSLP are not eligible for additional funding such as $2 subsidy, HSA funds, grants, etc.? Okay, this one is easy. So far, everyone's gotten it right. Yes, this is C. So C is the true statement here. NSLP can only be served on operating days to enrolled students. D was kind of a trick. NSLP is eligible for additional funding. So the $2 subsidy, severe need funds, any grants, HSA, all of that extra funding you can get through NSLP. And then Diana, thank you. We said this is applicable to this upcoming school year, so very good. Some of these were applicable in the past, but no longer are. Okay, so transitioning back to school meal programs. So the school breakfast program and the National School Lunch Program are available on operating days. This is including academic summer school. Meals are provided to enrolled students only, and meals are free to only those that are eligible. The Seamless Summer Option, or SSO, is available only during summer break, 10 or more day breaks, and in unanticipated school closures. SSO allows for open meal sites, and then all meals are free. And then for the summer food service program is also available only during school breaks or summer breaks, 15 or more day breaks, and in unanticipated school closures. And then with SFSP, it allows for open meal sites, and then all meals are free. So what are the major implications for SFAs? So this school year, meals are provided to enrolled students only. SSO is only operated in summer months, unanticipated school closures, or if you have a break in your school calendar that's over 10 days. If you are a non-community eligibility provision school, so a non-CEP school, you must determine student eligibility, including processing free and reduced meal price applications, so farm applications. And then counting and claiming process needs to have a student identifier. So you need to either take point of service on a student roster, you can use a PIN, you can use a fingerprint, any way that you would take that, but you can no longer use a tally sheet if you are not a CEP school. And then the meals are claimed at a student eligibility rates. So participants in the CEP program claim meals at the free rate based on their free CEP eligibility percentage. Non-CEP schools will claim their meals at the free, reduced, and paid rates. Okay, so who is eligible for free meals? Is it A, students that are directly certified, B, students deemed free or reduced via farm application, C, students attending a CEP school, or is it D, all of the above? Yes, this is D, all of the above. All of these are eligible for free meals. All right, so what does this mean for students? So free meals are only provided to eligible students. So students that attend non-CEP schools will likely need to fill out a farm application if they are not directly certified, and students will only be able to access meals at their site. So there are no more open meal sites for the school year. Next question though, true or false? Waivers are allowed for this school year. Yes, this is true. You only need to use student identifiers if you are a non-CEP school because you need to know what students ate and you need to know their eligibility status.
Alex, this is a good opportunity, as you said, to jump in. We do have some more questions. So while we're getting the slide deck back up and running, do you mind answering a couple questions?
Sure.
Okay. So for our first question is for the NSLP meal waivers, when meal service is limited by COVID-19, do the waivers also apply to individuals who are COVID affected, or is there a minimum group size? For example, classroom exclusions or school-wide temporary closure?
Liz, I feel like you set this question up for the next slide.
Perfect timing then.
Perfect timing. So it's actually on the next slide. If you don't mind, I'll answer it right now.
Go right ahead.
Okay, so we do have waivers for next school year. So a lot of these waivers are familiar to you all. However, for this school year, so not talking about summer because summer is going to be different than the school year, these waivers can only the next slide, Nigel. The waivers can only be implemented when congregate meal service is limited by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've seen these waivers before, but the difference this time is that you can only use them when you cannot serve meals at school because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So grab and go meals, including multiple days worth of meals, may be provided when congregate meal service is limited by the COVID-19 pandemic. So OSSI can support program operators in determining when congregate meal service is limited if you need help. But there are operational waivers for non-congregate meal service, so you can take the meals home and consume them at home, parent guardian pickup, serving meals outside of the allowable meal time, and then operating the serve method. If you are a high school, you can waive the offer versus serve requirement. Okay, so I think this next slide answers the question that we just got. So how to serve meals in varying scenarios. So if the scenario is a school operating day, but a student is absent or learning virtually due to COVID-19, so it could just be one student, it could be a classroom, it could be 3 students, or the entire school transitions to virtual learning due to COVID-19. So it's still a school day on the school calendar, but for whatever reason, the child is not present in the building because of COVID-19. You can serve grab-and-go meals through NSLP and SBP using the waivers. So that was a question we just received, but there's no minimum requirement. It just has to be a school operating day, and it could be one student absent, it could be a cohort, it could be a grade, it could be everybody that's virtually learning. Now, let's say the school closes due to COVID-19, so there's no instruction. So this did happen. I don't know if you guys remember when we had the Omicron surge right after winter break, a lot of schools shut down because of COVID-19, did not transition to virtual learning. There was just no instruction. You can serve meals, but in this scenario, you need to serve them under SSO. You can use the waivers because it's a COVID-19 related issue. It's an unanticipated school closure, and you can serve the meals under SSO. Now let's say that your school closes due to a non-COVID-19 related issue. So let's say you have a water main break, or you're doing construction that went a day over and you have to close school for whatever reason. There's a snowstorm. You can serve meals under SSO because it's an unanticipated school closure, but you cannot use the waivers. So this means the kids would still need to come to school between the hours that are allowed and eat meals on site because you cannot do non-congregate feeding. We don't see this come up a lot in DC, but I just wanted people to know it is an option for you all. So that being said, if you plan to serve meals during an unanticipated school closure due to COVID-19 or even not due to COVID-19, when you're filling out your school meals application this year, fill out the SSO portion. You don't have to use it, but it would be nice to have it if you think you might serve meals, because then if you have to close school at the last minute, you're good to go. You've already filled out your application, you've been approved, and you don't have to scramble at the last minute to be able to serve meals. Okay, so what hours can lunch be served? Is it A, between 10 and 2, B, between 11 and 2, C, between 11 and 1:30, or D, 10:30 to 2:30? Okay, I had a feeling this was going to be a trick question. I almost said it on the slide before, and I'm glad I didn't. The answer here is A. 10 and 2 are the lunch hours. A lot of people miss that. So yeah, so just so everyone knows, the lunch hours are 10 and 2. Cool. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the Keep Kids Fed Act. So on June 25th, 2022, 5 days before the waivers expire, we had a new act signed called the Keep Kids Fed Act. So this critical law provides relief to child nutrition program operators in a variety of ways. So a lot of this act had additional waivers for summer that I did not detail here as they don't apply to the school year. But for the school year, there was a temporary increased reimbursement rate. So the reimbursement rate includes a 7.4% inflation increase plus a temporary, so from July 1st to next June 30th, 2023, you guys are going to get an extra 15-cent increase for breakfast and 40-cent increase for lunch. So you don't need to do anything for this increase with waivers in your application. You're just going to get this additional funding. Okay. And then hot off the press are the reimbursement rates for next year. I received them yesterday. I had to come in, update my speaker notes, update the slides, but we have them. We didn't get them in time to send out and be on the tray, so I will make sure that we send this out as soon as we can after this training. But we do have the reimbursement rates for next school year, and I just popped a slide up here for you all to see. Okay, more on funding because we love talking about money. So we received 4.2 million in available funding for supply chain assistant funds. And then this is just like the overarching facts about them. So supply chain assistance funding can only be spent on purchasing unprocessed or minimally processed domestic food products. SFAs are required to maintain documentation that reflects unprocessed or minimally processed domestic products. And then examples of some allowable food products include fluid milk and other dairy foods such as cheese and yogurt, fruits and vegetables, grain products such as pasta and rice, meats, meat alternatives such as beans and legumes, and then foods in a wide variety of minimal processing states, so whole cut pureed, or like fresh, frozen, canned, dried. All right, and then we have some waivers that don't pertain to actual meal service. And so we have the LWP triennial assessment waiver. So this a waiver allows you to push the triennial assessment for another year. I'm going to talk about LWPs in a little bit later, but if you missed the LWP training that we did as part of our summer series, we have a whole recording on our website. So I'll reference that again a little bit later, but there is a waiver for that triennial assessment. The FSMC contract duration, so SFAs and SFSP sponsors may extend existing FSMC contracts that would not otherwise be eligible for extension to the 22-23 school year or until June 30th, 2023. Paid lunch equity, what we call PLE. So FNS recognizes that during this transition year, requiring SFAs to increase their paid meal prices could place a burden upon families who haven't paid for meals in over 2 years. So SFAs don't have to increase their lunch prices in the 22-23 school year according to the PLE requirements. And then carryover eligibility. So schools that meet the following requirements may use the most recent free and reduced price determinations for the from the 2019-20 school year during the 30-day carryover period of the 22-23 school year. So schools must have operated SSO in the 21-22 school year and not have eligibility determinations from the 21-22 school year in order to be able to use determinations from 19-20. Using this waiver is not required, so you don't have to use the determinations from 19-20, but it's an option for SFAs that have this data available. Okay, so let's just pause and see if there's any questions when we're talking about meals for this upcoming school year.
All right, we do have a couple questions, Alex, so I'll run through them. I've tried to group them together so they're similar in categories. So the first one is talking about meals for students who are attending virtual school on a regular basis. So the first question is, does this mean I cannot serve meals for a regular virtual day? And to clarify further, can I serve take-home meals on Thursday for Friday virtual school?
So students that are attending virtual school should have access to meals. Those meals are not reimbursable. So you can give them grab and go meals, you can have them come to the school, however you want to do. There's no real rules surrounding that. You just have to have meals provided to them and they are not eligible for reimbursement if it's a normal virtual kid. If they're learning virtual because of COVID-19, those are eligible for reimbursement under the waivers.
Great. And then the next question is similar. I think you already answered it, but in case it speaks any differently, a question was, we still have some students enrolled in virtual learning this upcoming school year. Will the waiver apply and is this reimbursable?
That again depends. If they are virtually learning because of the COVID-19 pandemic, then those are eligible for reimbursement. But if they're just attending virtual school through a virtual academy, or they typically attend virtual school, they are not eligible for reimbursement.
Great, thank you for that clarity. And then we have a question around if someone were to serve the seamless summer option in the school year. The question is the 10+ day break calendar days or operational days?
Those are operational days. So if you have 2 weeks off for Christmas, 5 and 5, you would have to have a longer break. The weekends do not count.
Great, thank you for that clarity. The next group of questions is regarding eligibility. So I'll start with some like farm application questions and then we'll roll into some CEP. So the first question is, how do we determine eligibility for students for September? So for submitting the August-September claim, do I use the eligibility of last school year when everyone was free under SSO, or do I try to figure out their eligibility? Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, so if for the first 30 days, you're going to use the last eligibility determination you have, which is likely 1920. So unfortunately, even though everyone was free last year, that doesn't count as an eligibility determination. So if you are a non-CEP school trying to determine eligibility for the first 30 days, you're going to use 1920 data or 2019-20 data unless you've received a farm application. So for the folks that you're receiving farm applications for from July 1st on, you're going to want to use that. If you have not received a farm application, you can use 1920 data.
Great. And then as a follow-up question, what if we don't have the 1920 data?
I don't know. My best guess is that, let's say the student transferred and you don't have 1920 data, I believe that you're going to have to get a farm application from them. But there are different rules around transferring students that are enrolling between LEAs or within an SFA. So you potentially could, if you can get their data, and Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that scenario would still apply here, where you can get their data from 1920 from their old school.
That is correct, Alex. And I'll even add to that, if there are students you don't have data for 1920, in the coming weeks, we will be sending out new access to the direct certification links that OSCE hosts for folks. And you should be able to see in the new way we're going to be showing you direct certification, you should be able to see students' prior eligibility from the prior year and the coming year, even if they were enrolled in a school other or in an LEA other than yours in the prior school year. So even if you don't have a farm application, if you have direct certification for that student, that would apply as well. And then Alex, similar question, but just worded differently, so I'm going to ask it. Can you use both 1920 and 2021 eligibility determinations if you apply for the waiver? This assumes that farm applications were collected and processed in 21-22.
I believe you can use the most recent eligibility that you have, but Liz, can you confirm?
Yes, hopefully we're answering this question as it's intended, but the most recent eligibility that you have should be used. So if a school collected farm applications this past school year in 21-22, that eligibility should be used.
It's just assuming that you did not collect farm applications, but if you collected them, use the most recent one.
Yep. And then to add to this, all of the kindergartners were not here in school year 1920. So how should we handle their eligibility?
For the kindergartners, you will need to collect farm applications since they just don't have carryover eligibility. So you'll want to make sure you collect that farm applications for them.
Yep. And I'll plug that direct certification list too. Some of those kindergartners may show up on the direct certification list. There are quite a few questions coming up in this category. So one more I see is that the 22-23 eligibility starts in October, right? So Alex, can you clarify when eligibility for the 22-23 school year starts?
So And this also, I think this question adds to it, direct certification list. A new list is available in SLED as of 7/1. In prior years, it was always updated 10/1. So 7/1 is the new list. It's supposed to be at the start of the school year, July 1st. We've changed our OSTI system to align with how USDA does it. So anyone that's on that direct certification list after 7/1 is on the direct certification list for the entire year.
Thank you. Okay, last couple on this topic. For adults schools beyond direct certification, if students weren't in school in 1920, then we just have to depend on farm applications, correct?
Yeah, so if they're not on the direct certification list, if you don't have transfer information from them, then you just will have to depend on a farm application.
Great. All right. I'm going to transition us to some CEP questions. Do CEP schools need to use student identifiers for accountability?
No, they do not need to. So if you're a CEP school, you can use a tally sheet with the numbers. You can use a clicker. You don't need to use a student identifier. Doesn't mean you can't, but that's one of the benefits of CEP. It makes doing point of service a lot faster and easier.
Great. And at CEP schools, can the point of service still be taken using the no ID button on the point of service, on the POS?
Yes. You don't need a student identifier, so you can just take it using no ID. You don't need to know who the students are since everybody's eating for free.
Great. Okay, switching topics. We have 3 more questions so far. Regarding the Keep the Kids Fed Act, does this apply to adult students as well? And I think this question is regards to the reimbursement rates.
It's going to apply to anyone that's in NSLP program. So if the adults are eligible for NSLP, it will apply to them as well.
Great. And now we have a supply chain assistance question. For those of us who are vended, does the supply chain assistance funding get allocated to our vendor like DoD funding does, or do we effectively use it to pay the applicable portion of our vendor invoices? And I can jump in and answer this one. You effectively use it to pay the applicable portion of your vendor invoices. So OSSI will provide a payment directly to you as the school food authority, and you then use that funding to pay for allowable costs. And last question that we have in the chat so far for you, Alex, is Second Chance Breakfast up to 10 a.m. in cafeteria count as alternative serving model for CEP middle and high schools?
Okay, I feel like these questions are getting planted because we're just about to talk about breakfast. So this is perfect.
Great.
Yes, so Second Chance Breakfast does count as an alternative breakfast serving model for middle and high school. And you can do Second Chance Breakfast at CEP schools or non-CEP schools. Anyone could do Second Chance Breakfast. Elementary school can, although we don't see it in elementary schools often.
Great. Well, thank you. That wraps up our questions for now.
All right. So I told you these were not planted questions. That was a real question that we got. But my last question here is it best to serve breakfast from the cafeteria? So it's not best to serve breakfast from the cafeteria. It's best to serve breakfast using an alternative breakfast serving model. So I'm going to kick it over to Lizette, who's going to talk about alternative breakfast serving models and HSA requirements surrounding them.
Thank you so much, Alex. So I saw the question in the chat and I was like, ooh, it's my time to shine. So thank you for that. And thank you for queuing us up with breakfast information with that last question. So this morning we will be talking about alternative breakfast serving models as well as some of the requirements of the Healthy Schools Act. And while the Healthy School Act contains several aspects to it, today we will be focusing on the requirement for breakfast. Some topics we will cover include alternative breakfast serving models and the benefits of serving breakfast in the classroom, also known as BIC. We will also discuss the breakfast in the classroom waiver as well as the alternative breakfast serving model annual subsidy. So the Healthy Schools Act, originally passed in 2010, ensures District of Columbia public schools, public charter schools, and participating private schools are a healthy place for all students that support healthy minds and bodies. Some of the requirements for HSA include that breakfast must be offered free to all students. Schools must ensure that menus are posted online. Also, there must be daily vegetarian options available. Another requirement is that all products are whole grain rich, meaning that the product contains at least 50% whole grains and the remaining grains in the product must be enriched. In terms of breakfast, elementary schools must offer breakfast in the classroom each day. Middle schools and high schools must offer alternative breakfast serving models each day. If 40% of the students at a school qualify for free or reduced price meals, and the school's current participation breakfast rate is below 75% of its daily average attendance, then they must implement breakfast in these ways. As mentioned, for elementary school in the classroom, and for middle and high schools, they must offer the alternative breakfast serving models each day. In order to calculate this percentage, the students that qualify for free or reduced meals, as previously mentioned, you are able to use data from the 1920 school year. Now that we've talked about some of the requirements, let's look at some alternative breakfast serving models. So what is an alternative breakfast serving model? An alternative breakfast serving model is a way to serve breakfast, such as breakfast in the classroom or breakfast on grab-and-go carts, and it is offered in one or more high student traffic locations other than the cafeteria. With alternative breakfast serving models, as our question asked before, breakfast is also available after the start of the school day or both before and after the start of the school day. An alternative breakfast serving model must be proven to increase student participation in breakfast when compared to the traditional serving model of serving breakfast in the cafeteria before the start of the school day. There may be other serving models other than the ones listed here, but they may require OSSE approval prior to being implemented. Each year, OSSE will collect information about the alternative breakfast serving models that schools choose to implement via the annual subsidy application, and this is a shameless plug. Applications for NSLP are due to us by July 30th. And again, this is typically done when we process the application. So when you submit your applications, we will be checking for the breakfast service model that you are implementing. And so one of the most beneficial ways to provide breakfast is in the classroom. And we would like to now discuss what some of the benefits are of serving breakfast in the classroom. One benefit is improved academic performance. Students that are well fed are ready to learn. Students may have fewer trips to the nurse with stomach aches, headaches, and other physical indications of hunger when they have breakfast in the classroom. Students will experience improved nutrition. Specifically, students with access to breakfast eat a better diet overall. And students who participate in school breakfast consume a wider array of foods than those who do not eat school breakfast or who eat breakfast at home. School breakfast can also help students balance their calories over the course of the day. And last but not least, school breakfast helps to build lifelong healthy eating habits. So before we continue, I would like everyone to think about some of the challenges or successes that they may have had implementing breakfast in the classroom. Feel free to drop them in the chat now, or we can discuss them. If you'd like to come off mute, you can raise your hand and we will be happy to hear some challenges that you may have or some successes that you have experienced. Thank you for that. So Heather mentioned that making food appealing when services in the classroom, that certainly can be a challenge. It's really nice to have it laid out in the cafeteria, but it can lose some of its appeal when we get into the classroom. Okay, Dimitri, I see some pest issues. That certainly is an issue with implementing breakfast in the classroom. We know that we have to rely on our janitorial staff to do quick and timely pickups of any remaining foods that may be available. And that could apply to both breakfast and lunch in the classroom. Yep, so thank you for those. I'm seeing some things around POS and getting accurate counting done. As some of you guys may know, I have been in your shoes. I know how challenging it can be to have teachers do some correct tallying in the classroom or turning in accurate meal counts on those rosters that you send. So that can definitely be a challenge. Okay, so keep those ideas coming. We certainly will allow opportunity for us to get into them. But as I said, I've been there. I know your pain. And one of the things I would like to just offer is, as you have your back to school professional development, just really working to share those concerns with not only your school leaders, but additionally your teachers, and share with them some of the implications of not having correct meal counts, such as less reimbursement for the school and opportunities for funding to come in that way. So now that we've talked a little bit about implementing breakfast in the classroom and some of the challenges, we want to move to the breakfast in the classroom waivers. So elementary schools, schools that are required to serve breakfast in the classroom may request a 1-year waiver to the breakfast in the classroom requirement by contacting us here at OSSI. When requesting a waiver, schools must include a strategy that will enable the school to reach a breakfast participation rate exceeding 75% of its daily attendance. Keep in mind that breakfast in the classroom waivers, or BIC waivers, requests are school-specific and does not apply to the organization as a whole. So if you have multiple sites, you would need to request a breakfast in the classroom waiver for each specific site. In addition, the strategy must be submitted to OSSI via a written action plan. Consequently, schools that do not demonstrate incremental progress towards meeting that 75% participation rate will be required to implement breakfast in the classroom at the start of the new school year. So in addition to the requirements that were previously mentioned, Healthy Schools Amendment Act created an annual subsidy of $2 per student for schools that serve breakfast via an approved alternative breakfast serving model. Once the school receives payment, these funds must be used to purchase equipment or supplies to operate the alternative breakfast serving model. Some examples include carts, bags, and trash cans that may be used for grab-and-go breakfast or breakfast in the classroom. Schools are required to submit an annual subsidy application in order to receive the funds. This is done in conjunction with your annual NSLP application. Typically, in January, we generate a report which indicates which schools are eligible for the subsidy. If we are certain that a school is serving breakfast via an alternative serving model and it is indicated on their application, we will follow up to ensure that their application is accurate so that they can receive the eligible subsidy. So once again, we'd like to hear from you. We know we've talked about some of the alternative breakfast serving models, but take a moment to think about how you will be serving breakfast and drop it in the chat. All right, so a lot of breakfast in the classroom. I think that's a great opportunity for you to receive those additional funds. Awesome. And so while we continue to have folks drop in the method that they will be using to serve breakfast in the classroom, I think this would be a great opportunity to just go through the chat and address any questions that we may have received during the presentation.
Thanks, Lizette. We got some questions, but I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I just want to do a quick correction. The BIC waiver request is only available for elementary schools. So if you are a middle or a high school, you can't do a waiver request. You got to do an alternative breakfast serving model. If you're in elementary school, you can request a waiver to just BIC. So first question we got, does grab and go count for breakfast in the classroom?
Grab and go counts as an alternative breakfast serving model. So where they take it, they can take the grab and go. They may eat outside. They may go to the classroom. But the focus is that the grab and go is an alternative breakfast serving model, and that would make you eligible for the subsidy.
Thanks. And it makes you eligible for the subsidy, but if you are an elementary school that wants to serve grab and go instead of breakfast in the classroom, you got to do the waiver. We actually see this a lot in elementary schools. So if you're looking to do this, just make sure you request the waiver because it's not BIC, but it is an alternative breakfast serving model. Okay, and then does the requirement for alternative breakfast serving models also apply to preschoolers?
That is a good question. I'm actually not certain about that, Alex. What do you think about that one?
Yes, it does. Everyone in the National School Breakfast Program is, well, that's participating in NSLP. So all the public schools and all the public charter schools are required to do HSA, and therefore those students are required to do the alternative breakfast serving model for breakfast. Okay, another question about grab and go. Can grab and go be picked up in the cafeteria?
So it can be picked up in the cafeteria. It's just not consumed in the cafeteria. The biggest thing about grab and go is that you want to make sure that it is picked up in the high traffic area. So if students have to pass through the cafeteria to get to their classrooms, that's fine as long as they're not consuming it in the cafeteria, then it would be considered grab and go.
Yes, and you'll also want to make sure that you have another grab and go station outside of the cafeteria. And so you can do grab and go station in the cafeteria, but you have to have another location located outside the cafeteria as well. So you might want to do it at like an entrance or in a hallway where the lockers are, some other high traffic area.
Mhm.
Is there a specific person to request a waiver from? So if someone wants to do a BIC waiver, how are they going to request that?
So you would start by reaching out to your program specialist. You should know who your program specialist is. We communicate with you pretty frequently. If you're not sure who your program specialist is, by all means, you can either check some of the communications that we've sent out, or you can email me directly and I'll share with you. Although right now there's just two of us and we are looking to get some more, but you can reach out to your program specialist to submit your BIC waiver.
And then the BIC waiver is located in Orchard. And so when you fill out, I'm just going to add when you fill out your BIC waiver, make sure you are explaining on how you're going to increase your participation. So if we get a BIC waiver that has no plan to increase participation, we're likely going to kick it back to you. And then you can send it to your program specialist for review if you would like, but there also is a place to upload it in your NSLP application this year. Okay, and then it says, can we serve breakfast in the classroom under NSLP, or do we have to do an alternative model for a high school?
So whether or not it's NSLP is not the determining factor, it's the age group. So because you are operating in high school, you would have to serve the alternative breakfast serving model.
And then I'm just going to do a shout out that I see in the chat. Someone that's a high school is doing grab and go and has captured a lot of meals using this method.
Yeah, I think any way that we can increase participation in high schools would be great because we typically start seeing a participation drop off somewhere in middle school, and then high school is very challenging to get the students to consume breakfast. So yeah, any way that we can do that with grab and go and things of that nature would be helpful to increase participation rates.
We got another question. It says, if our elementary school is not in CEP, then are they required to do BIC or the alternative breakfast serving model? So most folks on this call are required. There is a caveat. If your free and reduced rate is under 40%, you do not have to do an alternative breakfast serving model, or if your participation is over 75%. Most people fall within that category, but there is a caveat where you actually don't have to do it. So Beth, if you are non-CEP and you have a free reduced rate under 40%, then you are not required to follow this HSA regulation. And if you have specifics, most people it's required. But if you have a specific question, if you're unsure if your school falls into that category, you think you might be on the cusp, or let's say your breakfast participation is 100, you can reach out to us. If your breakfast participation is 100, you're likely doing breakfast in the classroom. That's how you're going to get there. But you never know. Maybe there's something else going on. So And then just one more clarification. So if we're considered a high school, we can or cannot serve breakfast in the cafeteria under NSLP. You can do breakfast in the cafeteria, you just also have to do it somewhere else. So if you're doing grab and go in the cafeteria, you need another grab and go line outside of the cafeteria. Or you can do second chance breakfast. That can be served in the cafeteria. So let's say everybody goes to first period and then you give people like a 10, 15-minute break to go grab breakfast. That's considered second chance. That can be in the cafeteria because you're giving them a designated time to eat. And then can grab and go be on the menu? Yes, you should have a menu for your grab and go breakfast.
Yeah, those two aren't. You don't have to mention the type of breakfast that you don't have to mention the breakfast serving model on your menu. So everything on your menu should be available via grab and go, or however you'd like to serve.
And then I'm just going to read this last comment because it made me laugh. In my experience of breakfast is 100% someone is not doing accountability correctly. That is also my experience. That made me laugh. So thank you. Okay, I think that's all the questions we have. I'll do another scan. If I missed any, we can ask them at the end.
Awesome, thank you. And so I will kick it over to my colleague, Kimberly, who will talk about Healthy Schools Act and vegetarian requirement.
Thanks, Lizette. And now to review the vegetarian option in the Healthy Schools Act. For a comprehensive review of what's included and required in the DC Healthy Schools Act, you can reference the Healthy Schools Act guide. It's a 2-page overview of our previously recorded webinar, but today we're going to focus specifically just on the vegetarian component of HSA. So HSA states schools shall provide daily vegetarian options for breakfast and lunch and are encouraged to provide plant-based food options as the main course for breakfast and lunch. This means they must be offered daily at all grade levels and be rotated. OSSI acknowledges that there are 2 different types of ordering, being self-prep and working with food companies for vended meals. The requirement and the intent of the Healthy Schools Act vegetarian component is still the same for both models of service. For self-preps, SFAs should forecast and adjust vegetarian meals, ingredients ordered. This means it may take trial and error for new schools or new sites for the first few weeks of school. Once production records are completed and you have meal participation patterns are established, schools may have a better sense of ordering projections. However, SFAs and schools, you still must prepare enough vegetarian meals or components for the students requesting them and have extras on hand for students they may request a day of. And as a reminder, students can choose a vegetarian meal at any time, so they don't have to fill out a medical form or identify as a vegetarian. So the key for your food service team is to adjust planning by participation and by student interest. And as I mentioned before, there are 2 different types of ordering. The same thing goes for where students access meals. So there's 2 different models of service we're familiar with. There's in the classroom, in the cafeteria, the different points of service. And the requirement is the same, but it can be implemented slightly different in each model, depending on staffing, the building layout, or just your general operational design of your school nutrition program. So for the classroom model, flexibility will mean that you can have 1 or more vegetarian options. I'm going to wait until we mute the line. Thank you. So for the classroom model, flexibility will mean that you'll have 1 or more vegetarian options available in each classroom, hallway, wing of school for students to choose the vegetarian meal the day of the service, in addition to enough meals to meet the number of students that were previously requesting. So this kind of goes back to what's your operational design or the building layout of your school. So the best practice is to create no food waste or additional program cost In the first few weeks of school will probably take some trial and error. So it's okay to change your implementation throughout the school year. So what you kind of trial for the first week, you may find out you want to switch it up and, have one meal in every classroom, then move to one meal in every wing. You just have to make sure that you do have enough for those that have identified themselves and extra on hand for other students. An implementation in the cafeteria is the second model of service, and it may be the most popular for SFAs, especially for lunch. So the key takeaway is all students have to have access, once again, to the vegetarian meal, but SFAs don't have to prepare a vegetarian option for each student. So say you have chicken nuggets on the meal or on the menu for the day for 100 students. That doesn't mean you need to have 100 chicken nuggets and then 100 vegetarian chicken nuggets so each student can select. But you just have to have enough meals based on the students that were previously requesting in daily interest, and that's the requirement. And now to go through a cafe scenario of preparing 100 meals for students at Aussie Academy. So let's say 3 students have formally requested vegetarian meals. Aussie Academy orders 100 meals that contain meat and 5 vegetarian meals. While completing production records, the food service director notes only 3 vegetarian meals were served. Should the director order or prepare 5 meals again for tomorrow's lunch? So let's walk through 4 different options. So option 1, you can keep the order the same. You must have a minimum of at least the 3 meals plus extras for additional students. Option 2, you can adjust the order. You must have at least 4 meals available. You may increase it based on if it's a popular entree. So that's another factor too is, the students that may just select a menu or an entree the day of, it may vary just based off of the popularity of the entree. Option 3, review the planned menu and order enough of the one main entree to cover all students. The main entree is vegetarian by default, so we see this a lot reviewing documentation and menus. Something like a cheese pizza that's offered every other Friday by default, that's already a vegetarian entree, or a bagel and cream cheese, something like that. Or the fourth option, another scenario that SFAs may find themselves seeing is when your school sells out of a vegetarian option, what is the recommendation? So Aussie recommends that SFAs look at what food is on hand. So this could be items that are prepared on the line, or it could be items that you have in your storage area. So that can be items that were planned for the lunch or the snack, the following items for the day of, or it could be items that you had delivered for later on in the week. And then look at the items and see how you can make substitutions. So things that you have on hand like beans, cheese, legumes, yogurt, peanut butter, things like that, and see how you can rework what's on hand to make a credible menu for the students. So the best practice is to review the monthly menus and the production records. And once again, the goal is to meet the Healthy Schools Act requirement and then not to create any additional food waste. And then for documentation, all food items, including the vegetarian meals and components in the classroom and in the cafeteria, must be on the menus, production records, any nutrient analysis reports, and the food labels. So the items, they must be clearly labeled and identified, and production records must show what was prepared, served, and left over for students. So the production record should be completed for items that are vegetarian or non-vegetarian. And for monitoring is the last component of the vegetarian meal part of HSA, and it will be verified through the administrative review process. So the documentation that we just touched on will be reviewed during the ARs. So ensure that all documentation is completed in its entirety and is clearly labeled and organized for us to review. And to review what we just learned, let's review this question. So what documentation will be reviewed? So you can drop your response in the chat. So it will be A, monthly menus, B, completed production records, C, nutrient analysis records, or D, food labels and recipes. All right, so I'm seeing a lot of different responses, but yes, it is all of the above. So monthly menus we'll look at, cross-compare them with completed production records. Same thing with the nutrient analysis. Compare the nutrient analysis to what was served, what was planned, what may have been substituted that's documented on the production record. And then we need to verify the items that were served do credit correctly, whether they're vegetarian or, like I go back to the chicken nuggets or they're vegetarian chicken nuggets. We need to see that all items do credit properly. So we're going to be looking at food labels in recipes, whether it's a self-prep school or you may be using frozen items that have child nutrition labels or yield factors for items. So it's all of the above. And now we're going to have a short Q&A on the vegetarian meal, so you can drop your questions in the chat. I see a few came through already, so we can start with those.
Thanks, Kimberly. So the first question we got, is there a list of acceptable vegan options? And the specific example here is Impossible Meat. So while you were chatting, I did a quick Google, and Impossible Foods do have child nutrition labels on them now. So if you are looking for foods that can be served, you can look for the child nutrition label. That's really going to make it easy for you if you're looking for meat alternative options, but also you can do tofu and legumes and things like that.
Correct. Yeah. So you'll find that there's commercial products that may have like the chicken meat alternative, something like Impossible Meat. So they may have child nutrition labels or things that are just commodities that you can serve as a meat alternative substitute, something like peanut butter, yogurt, tofu, that you can use the food buying guide from USDA, or you can see if they have child nutrition labels for it. But there's no exhaustive list of vegetarian or vegan options. So you may just have to reach out to your food vendor or the company that you brought the product for and see if they have specification sheets that you can use to verify how it credits. Or the recipe, or excuse me, not the recipe, the ingredient list. So you can verify the ingredients to make the clear determination that it is a vegetarian or vegan product.
Okay, and then the last question it looks like we have here is, if you don't have any requests for vegetarian meals, is there a minimum that needs to be ordered?
So you still have to make them available to all students. So if you have no students that have previously identified, it still needs to be an option for students that may elect to have a vegetarian meal the day of. So going back to what I previously mentioned, a student doesn't have to, fill out a medical form or previously identify as a vegetarian or a vegan. They may just decide that they want a vegetarian meal the day of, and it needs to be available as an alternative option.
So that's all of the questions that I could see now, but again, I'll go through the chat. We're going to take a 5-minute break, but before we go into the break, I really want you guys to think about, like, with the alternative breakfast serving models, with the requirement for vegetarian meals, with the next thing that we're going to talk about, it's really up to you all to be creative. And so it is difficult to figure out how are you going to hit all these things and be in compliance, but be creative, lean on us. If you have any questions, if you come up with an idea and you want to know if it's compliant, if you think this might work, we're really looking to you guys to be the experts, and you all know what will work best in your schools. So while we're telling you, here are the requirements, we want you guys to be creative and come up with school-based solutions on how to do it. All right, y'all, it's 11:16, so let's get started so we can all get out of here on time.
All right, thank you. All right, so I hope everyone had a good break. We're going to jump back into the training, and we're going to discuss a new piece of legislation called the Zero Waste Act, which was signed into law in 2020. So the Zero Waste Act, Omnibus Act, is just basically known as the Zero Waste Act. Its goal is to reduce food waste and packaging waste. This is different legislation than the HSA regulations, but it still has implications for school food service operations. So disposable and single-use items that are a consistent source of waste in DC, they may be found not only in restaurants, but also in school food service too. So this legislation, it builds upon other waste reduction measures in food service introduced in DC in recent years that you may be familiar with. The banning of the use of styrofoam containers and the 5-cent disposable bag fee. So SFAs and contractors, they shall provide accessory food service where only upon request by the student or at the self-service station. So meals shall not include accessory disposable food serviceware unless specifically requested by the student. So that's the intent and the goal of the act. And to review some new terms in the Zero Waste Act, upon request, self-service stations, model of service. So I won't read through all of these aloud, but just take a few seconds to read through them and keep these definitions in mind as we continue discussing the implementation measures. All right, and the first part of implementation involves using the zero waste procurement template. So SFAs will either be using a new contract that has zero waste built in or using a contract modification. So you can use the link in the slide and it takes you directly to those documents. Next, it's important to note that zero waste is required for all types of models of service and with all types of procurement that use disposable wares. So SFAs that use both non-disposable and washable wares do not need to modify their current operations. So as shown in the picture, accessory disposable food service wares such as utensils must be available at self-service stations or upon request. They cannot be pre-plated on the tray with food items or unitized with meals just pre-packaged all together. The last component is monitoring. So your school program specialist will be reviewing your current NSLP application for compliant procurement templates and contracts. And zero waste monitoring will be observed during site visits and administrative reviews and may become part of the formal administrative review reports in the future. And then, like I mentioned, how it is implemented, there are a few exceptions to utensils by request. So the exemptions are the meals that are served in the classroom from pre-K to grade 5. So really, the regulation applies to 6th grade and above. Below is exempt. And then field trip meals, early childhood meals, and meals served to students with disabilities. So everything that is listed here on the slide are the exceptions. And we are working on the development of a flyer that we'll be sharing shortly with SFAs. So we definitely encourage you to continue to work with your school staff and even students to see what works best for your school in the different age groups. But just remember that the goal of this legislation is to reduce waste and to work towards DC's sustainability goals. Alex, I just want to see, are you able to see the slides? I just see something, letters, no pattern.
see the slides, but if some can't, maybe Nigel, do you want to try to do just another restart? And then while we're doing that, I can answer 2 of the questions that came out. So one of them is, how does a preschool student know to request for a spoon? So luckily that is one of the exemptions. But as Kimberly mentioned, we're going to be putting out official guidance on it. We just wanted to let you know there are exemptions coming, knowing that it is going to be hard for some scenarios. And then the second one is, can plates and utensils be on the serving line, not plated, as a choice for them to take? So yes, it just can't be pre-plated, but there's no requirement on where the utensils and plates need to be. And then let's see, I see the slides coming. I can see them. Can others see them?
Thank you. And the last component of zero waste is shared tables. So all of these concepts, they have the same goal. So we're trying to avoid items being thrown away and decrease waste. So food service management contracts are encouraged to establish establish shared tables, and all other types of contracts must implement the shared tables in any model of service. And just looking at the time that we have, I think we just have time for one question on the Zero Waste Act.
Okay, so the slides will be shared after the call, and then I just answered one question that was very specific to a program. So I think we've answered all the questions, and we can go on to the next section.
Great, thank you.
So the transitional rule for sodium, whole grains, and milk. All right, so here's a little bit of background on how we got here. So in December 2018, the final rule would change the standard for milk, whole grains, and sodium. But then in April 2020, that rule was vacated. We went back to 2012. And then through June 2022, due to COVID-19, Congress provided USDA with authority to issue meal pattern waivers. And now here we are gearing up for the 22-23 school year, and we have a final rule for transitional standards that's short term, so for this school year and for next school year. So this rule is for milk, whole grains, and sodium. So for milk and whole grains, for milk, it allows you to serve flavored, low-fat, 1% or less flavored milk and NSLP. But HSA standards are stricter, so we don't allow any flavored milk. And then same thing with whole grains. The transitional standard is 80% of the grains must be whole grain rich, but HSA is stricter. So not all grains are, so all grains must be whole. So therefore, the transitional rule for milk and whole grains don't apply in DC. I'm just telling you this in case you find yourself reading transitional standards and you come across this and wonder why you haven't heard about it. It's just because it doesn't apply here. What does apply is sodium. So for this school year, we're going to maintain target 1, and then for NSLP, we'll go to target 1A. But school breakfast program is going to stay the same for the next 2 years. Now, in 2 years, we should have the final rule for these standards. This is just interim for 2 years. And then we have the sodium standard chart for lunch, and we have it for breakfast. Okay, and now let's talk about civil rights. So OSSI received a management evaluation in the 2020-21 school year. So you guys are not the only ones that get audits. OSSI gets audits too. In the 2020-21 school year, we received 3 audits from USDA. So one of them was civil rights. And then this required updates to various aspects of the program, which included solicitation, the permanent agreement, which is part of your NSLP application, updates to the civil rights training, and then additional translations of documents. So for procurement, the Civil Rights Assurance Statement needed to be updated with FNS Instruction 113-1, Civil Rights. So SFAs must ensure they have the Civil Rights Assurance Statement in their templates if you're not using the OSSI template. So if you use the OSSI template to go out to bid this year, you're good to go. If you didn't, or you didn't go out to bid this year, then you should sign a contract extension that has a contract modification for civil rights. So if you guys remember, we created, it's linked here, but we also created a procurement beyond the tray, sent that out there. It's in our procurement folder on the NSLP resource drive as well. So if you do not newly go out to bid, you'll want to sign that contract modification. The permanent agreement was also updated to include civil rights assurances and the new non-discrimination statement. So the agreements are embedded within your meals program application and will be signed off prior to submitting. So when you apply for NSLP or FFVP or CFP, everyone's going to read and agree to the permanent agreement. And so that's just been slightly updated. And then training requirements. So training is required for all individuals involved in all levels of administration of programs that receive federal financial assistance under federal laws, regulations, instructions, policies, and other guidance. So state agencies are responsible for training local agencies and subrecipients on an annual basis. Local agencies are responsible for training their staff and subrecipients on an annual basis. And then any new employees must receive civil rights training before participating in program activities. For teachers that are serving meals in the classroom are not required to attend additional civil rights training as long as they're receiving civil rights training as part of their regular annual teacher training. So what are the requirements for civil rights training? They're all listed here. If you've used the OSCE training, it has been newly updated to include conflict resolution and customer service. If you're creating your own training, you'll just want to make sure that it has all of these things in it. But since OSCE has a training, there's no need to create your own. So the OSCE updated civil rights training can be found on the Health and Wellness Training and Resources page. We've linked it here, but at the end of this, we send out the slides and we'll send out all the links that are important, so you'll have that too. And then you also need to keep track of your civil rights training along with your professional standards. So once you've taken the training, make sure you're documenting that somewhere. Okay, and then as everybody here should know, there is a new non-discrimination statement. So the Food and Nutrition Services Complaint Processing Policy has been updated related to program complaints alleging discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation in programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance. So in short, discrimination on the basis of sex in programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance includes discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and discrimination on the basis of gender identity. So what does this mean for SFAs? You'll want to ensure that all program materials, including your website, are updated with the new non-discrimination statement. You can use the public notification document that shows exactly what needs to be on your website. It's in Orchard, in the library. USDA just released the Spanish version of the non-discrimination statement, so I will make sure that gets out to everybody as well. And then additional translations of the non-discrimination statement are coming. They're not available yet. So next steps. So SFA is not using the 22-23 OSCE solicitation templates, must sign and upload the civil rights contract modification with your school meals application. You're going to read and agree to the permanent agreement in your school meals application. You can't even submit it without doing this. You'll want to create a plan for all food service staff to be trained on civil rights annually. And then you're going to want to make sure that all program materials containing the NDS are updated to match the new USDA NDS. So you're going to want to update your website, update any program materials, and then there's new and Justice for All posters coming soon. So until we get new and Justice for All posters, you're supposed to use the old one. If you don't have the old one, because we received them right before the pandemic, so I'm sure not everyone got it. We have the large copies here. So you're welcome to come to OSCE. Someone can run them down to you if you let us know you're coming, so you don't have to pay for parking, you don't have to find parking, and we can give you some of the old posters. When the new ones are available, we will send out information on getting all of those posters to you all. And then just to make sure we have enough time, I am going to skip the Q&A on this short section. I'll answer them in the chat, and then we can circle back at the end as well on any additional questions.
All right, Alex, thank you for that information. And we are going to transition now to learnings that we have seen from administrative reviews. As most of you know, we conduct administrative reviews for SFAs each couple of years. And today we're going to discuss some specific findings that we observed during the course of a review. Specifically, we'll look at some administrative review areas. We'll also look at production records and compliance with the Buy American provision. Concerns around the production records being filled out properly in the Buy American are repetitive issues that we've seen in recent ARs, and this is the reason why we're focusing on them today. So before we get into specific topic areas for today, let's take a look at the overall structure of an administrative review. First and foremost, the review is broken into three main areas: Performance Standard 1, which is critical, Performance Standard 2, which is also critical, and general areas. Performance Standard 1 may result in fiscal action. This is the paperwork standard. Documents that will be reviewed are benefit issuance lists, farm applications, direct certification, edit checks, and claims for reimbursement for all programs administered. Performance Standard 2, which may also result in fiscal action, reviews the meal pattern for the day on the day of the on-site review, as well as the week of menu review. The menu and meals observed will be checked for components and portion sizes. The review will include checking to see if the person is taking point of service is identifying reimbursable meals. General areas typically do not result in fiscal action. This covers everything else with regards to the programs. Today, we will be discussing production records, which is a Performance Standard 2 area, and the Buy American provision, which is a general area. First, we will look at common production record findings. I would first like to mention that the findings that we would discuss are just some examples and do not indicate all possible findings. The first thing that I would like to share centers on having the right document to begin with. Having an approved template can alleviate concerns about if you are accurately capturing needed information ahead of time. Ensure that your vendor is aware of what components are necessary. If you are switching vendors, be sure to ask for a sample prior to the start of service. Ensure that all components are present. It is your responsibility to ensure that the production records are compliant. Lastly, reach out to your program specialist if you have any concerns. The next finding focuses on production records not being filled out properly or at all. As a reminder, production records must be completed every day after meal service. Do not wait until the end of the week to fill them out. This can result in inaccurate information as you may not recall what happened earlier in the week. Please keep in mind that all fields must be completed. Partially filled out production records may not tell the complete story of whether a compliant meal was served. Additionally, completing the production record is the responsibility of the vendor as well as the SFA. The vendor provides initial information such as the meal type, components, and temperature of the food leaving their facility. The SFA must complete information regarding the temperature of food coming in, as well as during food service, as well as meals served, leftovers, and substitutions. Next, we have encountered production records on which all components are not listed. All components must be listed as mentioned in regulations. Again, to ensure that a compliant meal was served, it is crucial that all components are listed on the production record. If it is absent, there may be an assumption that the component wasn't served. Additionally, when meals are written in, ensure that the compliant meals are recorded. Common findings were fruit, vegetable, and milk were not associated with written-in entrees or main components for breakfast or lunch. We understand that meal may be written in from time to time. Again, we want to make sure that those meals are compliant. In the case of a substitution, schools may write in substituted items so that we can ensure that the meal pattern is still compliant for the day and ultimately for the week. Lastly, each condiment must be listed. Not only must they be recorded on the production record, they must also be included in the nutrient analysis. Temperatures not being recorded rounds out our list of findings. For food safety reasons, temperatures must be recorded. Taking temperatures must occur when the food is sent out from the vendor, received by the school, and prior to being served. A properly formatted production record will have space for each of these temperatures to be recorded. Now let's pivot to another area of the administrative review for which we have seen some findings. The Buy American provision, which we heard in the icebreaker that some folks had some Buy American provided provision compliant parachutes. The Buy American provision states that each SFA is required to purchase food that is produced or processed domestically, and if domestically processed, done so substantially using domestic agricultural commodities. Substantially means over 51% by weight or volume of the final processed product consists of domestic agricultural commodities. Therefore, any product processed by a vendor must have over 51% of the agricultural component of the product by weight or volume be domestic. To ensure contractor compliance, SFAs in their solicitations and contracts are encouraged to obtain a certification statement for vendors and manufacturers, which may include, we certify that, insert the product's name here, is processed in the United States and contains at least 51% of its agricultural component by weight or volume from the United States. There are limited exceptions to the Buy American provision, however, which does allow for the purchase of products not meeting the domestic standard in circumstances when the use of domestic products is truly not practicable. An alternative or exception may be used as long as documentation justifying the exception is maintained. Exceptions must be documented and must be done so before utilizing the exception. We will talk about exceptions in the next slide. And lastly, the documentation for exceptions must be maintained for 3 years. Exceptions may be requested at any point during the school year and are approved at the discretion of the SFA. They must be submitted prior to the purchase of the non-domestic food, and limited exceptions will be allowed. To request an exception, the vendor must submit in writing to the SFA alternative substitutes that are domestic and meets required specifications. They include the price of the domestic food alternative substitute and availability of the domestic alternative substitute in relation to the quantity ordered. It must also contain the reason for exception. Limited or lack of availability or price should also include the price for validation. This includes the price of the domestic food product and the price of the non-domestic product that meets the requirement specification of the domestic product. Also, the vendor should include the time period which they are requesting the purchase of this non-domestic food source. Examples of ways to document communications between SFAs and their food supplier regarding exception include emails, documentation of telephone communications, etc. However, alternatives to purchasing non-domestic food commodities or products should be considered first. In addition to considering alternatives, reasons for any exceptions must be provided to why the domestic product is being substituted with a non-domestic commodity or product. One resource SFAs and state agencies may use when considering alternatives is the market news reports available from the Agricultural Marketing Service, or AMS. AMS provides free, unbiased price and sales information on agricultural commodities. On the next slides, we will see some documents that could be used for approving and documenting exceptions. So here is an example of what an exception form and exception tracker could look like. On the left is the form that would be used to document each exception. Okay, awesome. Sorry about that, guys. Again, on the left is the form that would be used to document each exception individually. This should be completed by the vendor and approved by the SFA. On the right is the tracker to keep a record of all exceptions in one document. SFAs should be sure to monitor exceptions to ensure that they are minimal and not excessive. In the future, OSCE anticipates having a form that SFAs can have readily available to document exceptions as needed. Now that we know the requirements, we would like to share some of the common findings that we see on ARs. and share what steps SFAs can take to ensure compliance. The first finding is school staff not knowing about the provision. When going out to bid, this is part of the solicitation. If SFAs use the OSSI template, they can become thoroughly familiar with the requirements. If SFAs use their own template, they will be best served to share the solicitation template with OSSI prior to posting so that it can be thoroughly reviewed. In addition to the SFA not being aware of the provision, sometimes we see that the vendor or FSMC are not aware of the provision. The vendor should be aware of the provision as it is stated in the solicitation. Next, we see that some school staff are not aware that there is non-compliant product on hand. This can be easily reviewed on a daily basis for items that are delivered daily. For SFAs that may have food quantities on hand, a quick check daily or weekly can bring awareness to non-compliance. Sometimes the vendor or FSMC staff also may not know that there is compliant product on hand. Again, the vendor or FSMC staff will be best served to perform audits periodically to ensure compliance. When products are not Buy American compliant, most time we are seeing that there is no exception on the record. For everyone's convenience, we will be creating a Buy American exception available for use in the future. Now that we have discussed some of the findings that are observed with regards to Buy American compliance, let's discuss what SFAs can do to become and stay compliant. Being Buy American compliant begins with the procurement phase. When preparing your solicitation, you can be proactive in working with a new vendor by ensuring that they are aware of the provision and capable of adhering to its guidelines. SFAs should also perform audits periodically. Perhaps once per month, SFAs should perform a spot check of product that is on hand to confirm that they are compliant. Should an SFA find product that is not compliant, the exception document should be easily accessible if it is needed. Any non-compliance should be brought to the vendor's attention. Once the vendor is aware, they will need to provide proof that they have taken the previously mentioned steps to ensure that it was necessary to buy a non-compliant item. Buy American compliance is reviewed during the course of the administrative review. Taking these steps proactively can ensure that your site is following these guidelines of the provision. While no fiscal action is taken during ARs, there will be a finding should non-compliance be identified. At that time, SFAs will be required to submit corrective action, which should outline what steps will be taken to ensure compliance moving forward. And so now we will open it up for any Q&A that might be in the chat.
Okay, thanks. We just had a question come in around FFVP, so especially November through April. If they need to buy non-American items, do they have to fill out a form for each item that is non-American?
So yes, they would need to fill out an item for each item that is non-compliant. Filling out a group exception shouldn't be the course that the vendor takes. It should be for each specific item. And the length of time that they anticipate having to purchase those items.
And we just gave the form as an example. You can do an Excel spreadsheet if that's easier. It doesn't have to be a form, but each item will need their own justification. Okay, that's all I'm seeing for basically a cheat sheet to the administrative review. Lizette just gave you 2 findings we see all the time. So if you're up for an AR this year, we won't expect to see any Buy American or production record findings.
That is right, Alex, and I will turn it over to you for understanding the local wellness policy.
All right. So I just wanted to do a quick refresher on the local wellness policy. So Marie did a fantastic training on this a couple of weeks ago. So if you missed the training, she went into like the new templates, the requirements, how to use it. So if you missed the training, it's on our website, and I would definitely recommend going back and taking a look at that. But here are some highlights from that training. So there are federal and local requirements for the local wellness policy. All the requirements must be included. And then the requirements are both content and process oriented. So content requirements cover elements that must be included in the policy. And then Process requirements cover the way in which certain elements must be done, so it kind of speaks to like the how of the policy. So we have federal requirements here. So all of these requirements need to be included federally. I will say that we do see a lot of issues with public involvement and how the public is notified during an AR. So we're even giving you another bonus on things we see during ARs. So you'll want to make sure policy has that. And then DC also has requirements for the LWP. We've listed them here. So both federal and local requirements will be checked during an administrative review. So OSSI is a new template that we rolled out earlier this year, and the training that I mentioned that Marie gave walks you through how to use the new template. Our new template has been included or has been updated to include all federal and local requirements. So for this reason, OSSI strongly suggests that you use the new template. If you do not plan to use the new template, you'll want to ensure that your LWP has all of the requirements. If you're using the old OSSI template, the one that's from years ago, I can tell you right now, it does not have every single thing in it, especially with some of the new local requirements. So this is why we're really encouraging folks to use the new template, get your LWP committee together, and it's really nice, and it's color coded. So there's a color coded guide on how to use it. And then with that, there's some additional resources that she's created. So we have a requirements checklist, makes it really easy for you to check your LWP to see if it's in compliance. There's a lot going on this year. So let's say that updating your LWP isn't possible at the school, then you can at least use this requirements checklist, go through your old one, make sure everything's included. And if it isn't, you can update your old one to make sure everything is included. And so just another plug that there's a full training on it. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to Marie or you can reach out to your program specialist and we can connect you with her since she's really our LWP guru.
All right, thanks, Alex. Thanks so much. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes. I'm going to try to talk fast. I know we're running out of time, and talk about some of the resources that are available to you all. Excuse me. So the team offers a host of resources that are available to you and easy to access. Oh, hold on. Looks like there we go. These resources fall into three main buckets. There are OSSI tools that are stored on external programs or websites. There are resources that can be found on the OSSI website and newsletters. We've developed these resources with you in mind and with your input. Remember, all of those evaluations and surveys we sent out that you all completed with 100% participation, where here's how we took your feedback and implemented it. And we will continue to hear your feedback and enhance these resources as we go. This is not a shameless plug for the evaluation that we know you all will complete at the end of this training. So let's dive into some of those external resources. The first one we have here, internal resources stored on external websites. This is the NSLP Google Drive. The NSLP Google Drive is your first stop for all resources school meal programs. This is the largest and most comprehensive database of resources offered by our team. If you have questions on any of the topics as it relates to operating any of your school programs, the first place you should look is the NSLP Drive. There are templates, guides, trainings available for just about every topic you need to operate your program. We recommend that if you haven't done so already, that you go ahead and star the NSLP Google Drive as a favorite folder. To do this, once you're in the drive, just right-click on NSLP Resources and then click Add to Starred, and that'll make sure that it pops up for you. It's the very first thing you see whenever you need to reference it. The next is the Master Responsibilities spreadsheet. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's a master list of everything that's due, compiled, and easy to read in one spreadsheet that's organized by annual, quarterly, monthly, weekly, and daily requirements. You all should use this tool to ensure you're meeting all the deadlines and requirements of your nutrition programs. Each item links to additional information, so not everything is required for each SFA, so we recommend you download and edit this spreadsheet for your own specific needs. Each item should have additional links to find additional guidance. The spreadsheet is also found as a shared file in the NSLP Google Drive, so if you starred that file, you'll quickly be able to find the master responsibilities spreadsheet as well. Next is the calendar of deliverables. This calendar, the calendar of deliverables is also available, you guessed it, in the NSLP resources folder on the drive. This calendar shows you due dates for all the NSLP and SSO claims for the school year. And notice that the bottom half of the calendar of deliverables also lists all of the major due dates you should be aware of. For example, the first date that you're seeing now on this bottom half of the calendar of deliverables is July 30th, which is the due date for submitting school meal waiver request forms in Orchard. Between this calendar of deliverables and the new child nutrition programs training calendar, which is coming up next, you'll be able to stay on track for all of the due dates and trainings that the team will host over the next school year. Orchard. Orchard is the system in which you utilize to submit and modify your school meal programs, applications, and, as Lizette and Alex shared earlier, where you submit your BIC waiver, if you're going to do that. Within Orchard, there's an extensive library of required documents needed for the NSLP application. If you navigate to the library and click the Downloads tab, you'll find Documents and the Documents and Templates tab. From here, you can scroll down to the NSLP documents. You can see a list of the downloadable documents available on your screen. These will be helpful as you need them for your NSLP application. Articulate. So as you all know, the team over the years has started to develop and offer e-learning courses through the use of Articulate. The team will continue to release these resources via email with links to each specific course. Currently, the team has crafted a bunch of different resources. As Alex shared earlier, there is a civil rights training in there, there's a FFVP training in there, there's procurement, and a professional development standards training in there available for you as well. Please contact your program specialist, or you can contact me for a comprehensive list of all of those trainings. I'll be happy to share the links with those links for the training for you. Let's move to the OSSI website. So now we are in internal resources that are stored within OSSI. We have created several, wrong thing. Sorry, the website provides you with a host of information. The OSSI website provides you with a list of memos that USDA and OSSI has released. Some guidance documents are stored there for you. And there's also a list to our training and resources there as well. So you'll be able to find or have access to any of our pre-recorded open calls or our recorded webinars. And that's also where you will find the recording of today's session. It will be posted there for you. Next slide. All right, I talked about this earlier. This is the Child Nutrition Program's training calendar. This is one of our newest resources. This training calendar lives on the OSSI website on the Nutrition Services page, and there's a link directly in this PowerPoint as well. So if you click that heading, it'll take you to the calendar. This calendar bridges the gap between the school programs team and the out-of-school CACFP team to ensure all child nutrition program staff remain aware of all the training that we do as a team. From the calendar, you can search for and find all of the upcoming trainings along with the relevant details for those trainings. You can register for the training on the spot and even add trainings to your personal calendar. I highly recommend that you bookmark this tool and make it one of your go-to resources. And again, we'll provide links to all of these in a follow-up email. One of the last things I want to talk about is our newsletters. So we release 2 monthly publications to keep you all in the know. The Beyond the Tray newsletter provides the latest information on all things school meal programs, keeps you abreast of grants and other opportunities that are available, alongside a host of other resources. The Sprouted Out newsletter is the go-to resource for all things school garden programs, but often provides resources and information for schools without school garden programs. I encourage you to subscribe to both. Links to subscribe to either newsletter will also be provided in that follow-up email. Let's talk about some external resources that we think you all should be aware of. The very first thing is the USDA website. We check this one frequently, and we think you all should check this webpage frequently too. It's one of the main places that we would recommend. USDA's website is extremely extensive, and I could spend a good chunk of time diving into the many pages that it has, but we don't have that kind of time today. I'll just leave you with USDA's website will have fact sheets for all child nutrition programs. All of their memos that have been released are there for you to study up on if you need them, and there's much, much more on there as well. ICN is the Institute for Child Nutrition. It's the best place to check for resources so you don't go recreating the wheel when developing resources for parents and families as it relates to child nutrition programs. They also offer a host of free webinars and trainings and have an extensive food safety library that includes videos, printable posters, standard operating procedures, and much more as it relates to your food safety plan. SNA, or the School Nutrition Association's website, is also another place to read the latest news around what's going on in school food and nutrition world, as well as find current trainings to help you stay on top of your knowledge. SNA takes all of the latest regulations and updates, it digests them and summarizes them so that it's easier for you to implement these regulations and updates in your food programs. SNA is a member-based organization, but a lot of their resources can be found for free. The last one that I'll talk about is FRAC. This is the Food Research and Action Center. FRAC is the best place to go find research on the extent of hunger and poverty and obesity among food insecure households. FRAC offers a host of reports and downloadable guides, and their newsroom can help point you in the right direction if you're looking for specific policy news. That was really quick. I'm out of breath. I'm going to pass it over to Liz to take us through our final Q&A.
Thanks, Nigel. We are very cognizant of time and want to make sure while this calendar invite goes till 12:30 that hopefully everyone gets out a little bit early, because who doesn't want to end a training early? Alex, before we keep going, are there any questions you want to answer in the chat? Because I do think we have time to do that.
Awesome. I do want to circle back since we did skip the Q&A for civil rights and the non-discrimination statement. So the non-discrimination statement has a grace period, just so everybody knows. I'm going to drop that into the chat now. So all of your websites are required to be updated within 90 days of this memo, which came out on May 5th. So that's, let's just say, August 5th. Good news is applications are due before that, so all of your websites should be updated before you submit your application to us. Documents, pamphlets, brochures using 2015 must be updated when either your current supply is exhausted or by September 30th. So there's been a lot of questions about farm applications and information going out related to that. You can use the old materials until September 30th. You probably have to use the old materials since the new Spanish just came out and we're waiting for the other ones. So don't be shy on using old materials if you don't have access to the new ones, since there is a grace period. However, if you are printing something, especially in English, since that one is available, and Spanish, because that just became available, you want to use the new 2022 NDS. And then there's no timeline for Justice for All posters. We have not received one for USDA. They're waiting on pricing for the country, and then they will send that out to us. So for And Justice for All, you're going to use the old one. So websites first. The new English stuff is updated in the Spanish farm application, and until you hear from us, you can use the old NDS on your documents until the new ones are available. Okay, that was like the main question that I saw. A lot of this stuff has been answered in the chat, but I don't know if there is any other clarification.
Nigel, I think I just saw two questions related to your presentation. How can I be added to the Google Drive? And can you drop the link for the Google Drive in the chat? So Nigel, anything to weigh in on that?
Sure. So you can send me an email and I will get you connected to the Google Drive. It's not a problem, easily done. I will drop the link to the Google Drive in the chat. Give me a second. Or if one of my colleagues can drop the link, that would be great. However, I am going to send out that follow-up email with all of the links to resources, and in there will also be a link to the Google Drive. If you don't have a Google account, you can just request access and I'll see it and add you in there.
Great. Thanks, Nigel. And then we did have a couple more questions come through at this point, so why don't we walk through those? Going back to the HSA vegetarian requirement, does having a vegetarian option available mean, for example, the item is cooked and displayed on the cafe serving line, or would available include holding the option in a fridge and heating upon request?
Yes, so the option does need to be cooked and on the line. It needs to remove the stigma of students requesting an option and it not being available readily for them. So if you are operating the cafeteria model, the option does need to be heated and available for the student to come through the line. There doesn't need to be like any lag of them requesting the item and then receiving it.
Thanks for that clarification, Kimberly. And then I see that Lizette dropped the link to the Google Drive NSLP resources page in the chat so folks can have it there, as well as Nigel will be sending it out afterwards. And then last question I see is just confirmation, Alex, that the OSSI resources page is up to date on the NDS statements.
The English one is. The Spanish one is not.
Okay. And we will be sending out, I think, an updated and circulating when that is up to date because USDA just released it. Okay.
I'll just say one more thing on like the vegetarian meals. And I'm just going to circle it right back to creativity. I did it once. I'm going to do it again at the end. You guys are going to have to get creative. And if you are unsure if you're doing something correctly or you want to run ideas by us, just ask us. You can call your program specialist. You can shoot us an email. You can ask us to come out on site. If it's not an administrative review and we come out and you're doing something wrong, all we can do is help you fix it. And there's no way to document it. We're really just there for support. So we want you guys to be creative, come up with solutions. And if you're not sure and you need some guidance, just reach out.
All right, we do have continued questions coming in, so I know we do have a bit of time. I'm gonna keep going with the Q&A. We'll cut us off at some point. But one question I'm seeing, there's an information about grains, and then I think the question here is how much whole grain can a student eat every day? So I can have Alex or team chime in on that, or if we want a minute to ensure our answer is correct before we answer, we can do that too. Okay, let's come back to the whole grain question. We will dig on that and circle back. There's a question.
I'm
Sorry,
just
go
going
ahead,
to
Alex.
do, sorry, I was like reading it. I was like, okay, this has got some math in it. So you guys are really testing us. You just want to make sure that you have to make sure that the calories are within range. So when you're trying to figure out your meals, you still want to make sure they're balanced and that your calories are within range. And there is a whole grain requirement. You have to serve a whole grain a day at breakfast and at lunch, and 2 even at breakfast. So we can give like more detail on that, but if your meal is within that range for meal components and the nutrients, then you should be good to go.
Great. Thanks for that answer, Alex. We have a couple more questions regarding the non-discrimination statement and within the firm application. So I'm just going to reiterate that we will send out an updated version so that everyone has the correct links to it. We will update it on the Google Drive so that there's reduced confusion there. Another question we have is, are any seconds served to a scholar counted as a meal served? Alex, do you want to try to take that one?
You can't claim second meals at lunch. If you're serving second meals, for whatever reason, you can notate them on your production record. You can actually serve second meals at breakfast and claim them. You just cannot prepare meals in intention to serve second meals. So let's say you have leftovers at breakfast, 10 leftover, and you want to serve them, you can claim those meals. You can't do that at lunch, but you can at breakfast. The caveat is you cannot be preparing meals at breakfast intending to serve seconds. It's only if you have them as leftover.
Thank you. And then the last question we have right now is how much time needs to be available for breakfast, or where do I find those details?
Breakfast doesn't have a time requirement like lunch does. Lunch has a 30-minute requirement, breakfast doesn't. The requirement is that it needs to be served after the school day starts. And I would just make sure they have enough time to eat. So if you're only giving the kids 5 minutes to eat, probably not enough time. But if your kids are having enough time to finish their breakfast, then that should be good.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we have right now. And so I'll kick it back to Nigel for an evaluation.
Sorry, y'all, my computer's lagging a little bit. It's tired. It's been in training all morning. I talked about a little shameless plug earlier around the evaluation. Before you go, we would love to hear your feedback on how we did today. Again, your feedback is completely anonymous, and it really, really helps us improve our technical assistance, our training, our resources. So I'm going to drop a link to the evaluation. There's 140 people registered. I hope to see 140 people complete the evaluation. Here it is now.
Thank you, Nigel. So while everyone is filling out their evaluation, giving us some feedback, we just want to share, we do take that feedback into consideration as we are developing resources and trainings and doing the work we do for you all. So please let us know. It's really helpful information. And now we are going to enter our final part of this morning. Thanks for sticking with us for the entire morning, our closing section here. So I want to share some of the responses that you all gave about 3 hours ago at the beginning of our session about the creativity you're going to use and how to make meals accessible in this coming school year. So you can see some here, and when we send out the presentation, you'll be able to see them more clearly. Apologies that they are quite small, but some that I really found interesting and want to highlight is that folks have already started NSLP outreach as they transition back to free, reduced, and paid statuses. And that is so valuable to have started that already prior to the school year starting. Another one that stuck out to me was that folks are planning to use vending machines for high school students, continuing the use of grab and go carts, and have created and distributed a community health manual for families. So inspiring. So thank you for sharing that. The last one I'll just share out loud is another colleague is working with vendors to plan ahead. So when something does happen, because it may, we're ready to go. They are communicating frequently with families, so families know what to expect in cases of, change in operations. So thank you again for sharing that. Thank you for being creative and listening to all of the updates we have for you this year and applying your creativity to it as you have the past 2 years to make sure that our students in DC have access to meals each day. Before we head into final announcements, I just wanted to share a quote from Amanda Gorman that I know I've circled back to on some challenging days over the past few years. The quote is, "For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." I know each of your school communities continues to be a place of joy and light for DC students and staff, and thank you for making it that. All right, so some final announcements for folks. As I think many folks have mentioned already today, the school meals application, including waiver request forms, is due in Orchard July 30th. Please make sure that you are well into completing that application and submit it. Before the start of school, we recommend that you download and customize meal programs responsibilities workbook. So this is what Nigel went over. It outlines all of the responsibilities that you may have pertaining to the meal programs throughout the year, and then gives you columns to organize yourself and set dates for when you'll make sure to complete those items. In addition to our large format training this morning, we have a summer series sessions, the ones that have already been conducted on local wellness policy and eligibility. They are posted on our website, so feel free to listen to those recordings as you have time. And we have 2 more up and coming. On August 1st, we have a summer series sessions on food safety, and on August 17th, best practices for local procurement. You can click directly on the links to register if you haven't done so already. And then I know folks may have questions about pandemic EBT or PEBT. I just wanted to flag that we will be coming out with an announcement soon with details. The District of Columbia has now been approved for pandemic EBT in the 2022 fiscal year. And so those implications as they regard to farm applications in the coming school year, we will come out with details so you can be prepared to make sure to process those applications and communicate directly with families. We didn't have the communication quite ready for today, but know that it is forthcoming and we want to have it very clear when we have it for you. Okay, I see Nigel plugging one last time to please fill out this evaluation before you hop out of this meeting. The link to the evaluation is in our chat there. Final thank you. This is all of our contact information, our phone numbers, our email addresses. Hopefully you know where to find us. We're down on First Street near Union Station if you want to come visit us as well. Personally, thank you for all the congratulations in my new position. I am so thrilled to have been with this team, and now I reflected this morning. This is my 7th school meals annual training that I've been a part of. As from OSSI, 4 prior to that as a part of DCPS, and I'm really excited to continue working with you all. I'll be working even closer with this team as well as teams who administer the SFSP and CACFP. So thank you as a personal note from me. Thank you from the team. We've got you out about 15 minutes early as long as you've completed your evaluation, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the day and summer.